was a great thrill to meet Daniela Hoffnung yesterday in Cologne. And as we were driving over here tonight, the other three ladies were sitting in the back seat, and the driver changed the channel to the classical music station. And suddenly on comes this very lovely woman's voice announcing the classical station, and all the people in the back seat shouted, "Daniela!" But it was lovely to meet, you know, the voice of the German books, so to speak. Yes, you've just met the other voice of the German books. But you'll have to put up with the English voice for a little bit. Now, at this point in the story, the snow has melted. We left them at the end of ein Konschnee with snow coming down, but now the snow has melted. We have streams are full of water, very cold water, and Claire is wading up one of these streams, picking watercress, which is a water plant, for salad, and putting it in her basket. Well, she hears screaming and shouting coming from up the creek, and so going to see what this is about, she finds the gentlemen of her household having their spring bath in the cold water. And so she pauses, of course, to enjoy this spectacle. And then she goes to put her basket away, but she sees her husband, Jamie, emerge from the water, wrap himself in his plaid, and go off up the hill. And so she puts her basket aside and goes to follow him. I waved briefly and turned up the side trail that led to the upper clearing. New house, everyone called it, though the only indications that there might someday be a house there were a stack of felled logs and a number of pegs driven into the ground, with strings tied between them. These were meant to mark the placement and dimensions of the house Jamie intended to build in replacement of the big house when we came back. He'd been moving the pegs, I saw. The wide front room was now wider, and the back room, intended for my surgery, had developed a growth of some sort, perhaps a separate still room. The architect was sitting on a log surveying his kingdom, stark naked. "Expecting me, were you?" I asked, taking off my shawl and hanging it on a convenient branch. "I was." He smiled and scratched his chest. "I thought the sight of my naked backside would likely inflame you." Or was it maybe Bobby's? Bobby hasn't got one. "Do you know you haven't got a single grey hair below the neck? Why is that, I wonder?" He glanced down, inspecting himself, but it was true. There were only a few strands of silver among the fiery mass of his hair, though his beard, the winter growth tediously and painfully removed a few days before, was heavily frosted with white. But the hair on his chest was still a dark auburn, and that below, a fluffy mass of vivid ginger. He combed his fingers thoughtfully through the exuberant foliage, looking down. "I think it's hiding," he remarked, and glanced up at me, one eyebrow raised. "Want to come and help me hunt for it?" I came round in front of him and obligingly knelt down. The object in question was in fact quite visible, though admittedly looking rather shell-shocked by the recent immersion, and a most interesting shade of pale blue. "Well," I said after a moment's contemplation, "great oaks from tiny acorns grow." Or so I'm told. Oh, you do speak English. A shiver ran through him at the warmth of my mouth, and I lifted my hands involuntarily, cradling his balls. I'll tell you about that later. "Holy God," he said, and his hands rested lightly on my head in benediction. "What did you say?" he asked a moment later. I said, coming up momentarily for air, "I find the goose flesh rather erotic." "There's more where that came from," he assured me. "Take your shift off, Sassenach. I haven't seen you naked in nearly 4 months. "Well, no, you haven't," I agreed, hesitating, "and I'm not sure I want you to." One eyebrow went up. "Why ever not?" "Because I've been indoors for weeks on end without sun or exercise to speak of. I probably look like one of those grubs you find under rocks, fat, white, and squidgy." "Squidgy?" he repeated, breaking into a grin. "Squidgy," I said with dignity, wrapping my arms around myself. He pursed his lips and exhaled slowly, eyeing me with his head on one side. "I like it when you're fat." "But I can quite well be you're not," he said, "because I felt your ribs when I put my arms about you each night since the end of January. As for white, you've been white all the time I've known you. It's not likely to come a great shock to me." As for the squidgy part, he extended one hand and wiggled the fingers beckoningly at me. "I think I might enjoy that." I said, still hesitant. He sighed. "Sassenach," he said. I said, "I've not seen you naked in 4 months. That means, if you take your shift off now, you'll be the best thing I've seen in 4 months." And at my age, I didn't think I'd remember farther back than that. I laughed, and without further ado, stood up and pulled the ribbon tie at the neck of my shift, Wriggling, I let it fall in a puddle round my feet. He closed his eyes, then breathed deep and opened them again. "I'm blinded," he said softly, and held out a hand to me. "Blinded, as in sun bouncing off a vast expanse of snow?" I asked dubiously. "Or as in coming face to face with a gorgon?" "Seeing a gorgon turns you to stone, that strikes you blind," he informed me. "But come to think," he prodded himself with an experimental forefinger, "I may turn to stone yet. Will you come here, for God's sake?" I came.